Now, George Osborne says he's shocked. Vince Cable is appalled. Labour says it's deplorable. Those are just some of the phrases used to describe the latest allegations against the Royal Bank of Scotland. RBS is accused of deliberately forcing some companies into administration in order to seize their assets. Those are the allegations contained in a new report into bank lending out this morning. The report has been produced by this man, Lawrence Tomlinson, a wealthy entrepreneur who made his fortune in the care home business. He focuses his criticism on a division at RBS known as the Global Restructuring Group, or GRG, which handles loans which are deemed to be risky. Mr. Tomlinson claims that some perfectly good companies have been engineered into GRG, some of which then collapsed. He states that a perception has arisen that the intention is to purposefully distress businesses, to put them in GRG and subsequently take their assets at a discounted price. Another review from the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Sir Andrew Large, into the lending practices at RBS is also being published today. His initial findings earlier this month found serious allegations of poor treatment by firms in financial distress. Well, with me now are the Shadow Business Secretary Chuka Umunna and the Conservative MP Brooks Newmark, who sits on the Treasury Select Committee. Your reaction, first of all, Brooks Newmark, does it surprise you?
No, it doesn't. It's something that I've been talking about since I first got on the Treasury Select Committee, because it's something that, as MPs, all of us get constituents who write in and particularly focus on the banks, and RBS in particular.
Right.
And RBS, more than almost any other bank, has been driving some perfectly healthy businesses underwater.
Right, so it is that particular allegation that perfectly viable businesses, not ones that were struggling, but ones that were doing all right, were driven out of business.
There are two sides to that. One argument is perfectly healthy business, which I've seen a number of SMEs I'm focusing on, small, medium-sized enterprises that suddenly have the goalposts moved on them. Suddenly their loan comes up for renewal and they're told, sorry, we're no longer lending to that sector or to you in particular without any reason given whatsoever. And the problem with that is that once one bank says no to you, even if you're healthy, no other bank is going to touch you with a barge pole.
But you do accept the point that people are obviously very attached to their businesses. They have an emotional as well as a financial attachment to them, and that RBS and other banks were being put under huge amounts of pressure to clean up their balance sheet, get rid of businesses that could perhaps be viewed as difficult in the future, that actually not all of them were viable and perhaps they were just doing what was necessary.
Yes, all banks have to, number one, clean up their balance sheets, shore up their balance sheets and provide more liquidity, i.e. more cash. But the problem isn't in doing that, though. They were driving perfectly viable businesses underwater and not really working through their restructuring group businesses that were just slightly teetering on the edge. They drove them under instead of saving them.
Do you recognise that too? Is this a picture you recognise?
We've had anecdotal evidence given to us to that effect, but actually we're slightly missing the point with the central allegation. The central allegation in the report is that RBS was systematically, artificially distressing businesses with the goal of putting them under so that they could seize their assets and therefore profit from them. And that is gravely serious. And I think it's...
Well, I think it's all gravely serious, isn't it?
I think, you know, Vince Cable was absolutely right to refer it to the Financial Conduct Authority and the Prudential Regulation Authority. But in the meantime, RBS can do two things which I think would give people confidence. First of all, the Chief Executive of RBS needs to come out and confirm that that global restructuring group, which is the turnaround division, is not used as a profit centre, but is actually used to minimise losses in respect of potentially distressed businesses. Just confirming that fact, I think, would start us on a road to giving people confidence that they are not basically rigging this system. The second thing that needs to happen is the core problem that is identified is the way in which the business's assets are actually valued. And they're saying that the way they are valued is skewed towards giving them an undervalue so that the bank, through its West Register property owning arm, can then sell these assets once they've seized them at a profit. I think one thing the bank could do is actually get the valuation given not just to the bank, but to the businesses as well. So those carrying out the valuation have a duty of care to the businesses and not just the bank. Those two things can happen now, and I would like to know what RBS have to say about that.
Right, well, obviously we'd love to hear from RBS at the time they actually going to make a statement. What happened to regulation over this period, Brooks Newmark?
It depends which period you're talking about.
Well,
You're talking
let's do
about
the post the crash.
Post the crash. Well, I think, as we've seen even recently with the Paul Flowers case, it's been grossly lamentable. And I think that we wanted to see a step change, and I think a number of the problems happened over the old FSA. And hopefully with the new FCA, the new regulator that sits within the Bank of England, some of the problems that we saw before hopefully will be addressed. But I think the point that Chuka makes is absolutely right. If these allegations are true, that they're trying to be a profit centre and prey on weak businesses to put them under and then make business from those assets, that is a serious allegation that must be dealt with.
Right, but it is an allegation, and we all are talking about anecdotal evidence here.
Of
Chuka.
course.
And also, people will question this entrepreneur in residence, Mr. Tomlinson, a businessman who will have sympathy, rightly or wrongly, with the business's concern. I mean, are you absolutely sure that that very serious allegation is going to be borne out, if you like? Because our business editor today says that the bank was under a huge amount of pressure to get rid of zombie businesses, businesses that were failing. Pressure from both your government and your government to clean up balance sheets, put RBS under an enormous amount of pressure to do exactly that, clean up their business.
Well, look, that's why Vince is right to have referred it to the two authorities concerned, but you are right to question the facts here, and that's why we've got to have the authorities establish that. From what I've heard, I mean, I had a very long conversation with the turnaround. I mean, I used to practice as a lawyer myself. I didn't do that much insolvency. But as I understand it, post-0809 and the nationalisation, well, the wholly nationalised nature of RBS, the way that it was managed became much more centralised. There was less local discretion for relationship managers, and also actually less discretion within this unit, which may have impacted on how people were treated. But I mean, there are other things that obviously you'd expect to find out. To what extent do the incentive arrangements of those managing that unit link to what may have happened? And also, there's another issue here, which is why I think we do need to establish the facts. Potentially, to me, it would seem that issues of legality, whether this is lawful, what was going on as well.
And that will be investigated. Do you accept the tripartite regulatory nature under Labour failed? And that, in part, is to blame for what happened?
Well, I think generally there was a political consensus towards a light touch regulatory model in respect of the financial services sector,
and it was wrong, wasn't it?
which obviously failed because we wouldn't have had the global financial, we wouldn't have the global financial crash.
No,
now, in terms of the tripartite system or the
yes.
Twin Peaks model, I mean, I'd refer to what the former head of the FSA said in respect of this when he gave evidence to the Select Committee when I was on it, and he said essentially you could have tweaked the tripartite model and improved it, or you could have had the current Twin Peaks model as it is now. The key thing was nobody in the overall system was taking overall oversight of financial stability.
But that was a system set up by Gordon Brown, and it was wrong.
Joe, I've said
absolutely.
clearly the system was not what it should have been.
And clearly you'll agree with that, of course.
Well, no, and the reason why...
But you weren't calling for heavy regulation either. No Conservative was calling for heavy regulation of banks.
Wait a second. There's a difference between heavy regulation and better regulation. Okay? What we call for is better regulation, not necessarily more regulation. I think the problem with the tripartite system was that when a problem happened, the problem fell between three stools.
We were being crucified for over-regulating
by putting it under the
Bank
of England remit.
Well,
there's one final decision maker who says, I have oversight of all three of these parts and therefore can make a judgment. When you have three different regulators, things tend to fall between three different stools. And that was the weakness of Labour's proposal.
And you are as shocked and appalled as everybody else by what might have happened partly as a result. I'm just going to ask Deborah Breed, what's your view? Are you as shocked and appalled by the report today?
I think it also comes alongside Andrew Large's report into RBS and SMEs. So I think, and on the back of last week's revelations about banking, I think the nation as a whole, the inexpert nation, is just throwing its hands up and saying, what else is going to come to light? I mean, Lawrence Tomlinson's role in this is really interesting. He's essentially an independent. If he hadn't asked these questions, would we have known? And what else is there simmering that might be uncovered through somebody's passion and investigative skills?
I think what he's done is actually precipitated a proper process in respect of the two agencies involved, the Financial Conduct Authority and the Prudential Regulation Authority, who should actually look into this. I think, he's done us a service in terms of putting it all into one report.
Why was that? Why did it need him to do that? Why was the system not picking this up?
In fairness to the business secretary, he commissioned and got him to do that, and I think that's a good thing.
But the regulation, that's Deborah's point, it didn't pick it up either.
And it's because the problem is that the regulators don't tend to be populated with industry practitioners. He is an industry practitioner who was brought in from the outside, highly sensitive to what's going on with SMEs, and has actually brought to light a number of the issues made to all 650 MPs from all parties.
Right.
We've all seen the similar anecdotal
Yes,
evidence
and that's obviously
in our
pressure.
casework.
Well, and in some ways that's worked,
Yes.
albeit rather slowly. What should be the sanction? I mean, you've talked about it perhaps being illegal, unlawful. What should be the sanction?
Well, there's a question of whether civil liability attaches to what's happened or whether what we've seen is fraudulent and criminal. And I think in advance of the PRA and the FCA actually delivering their findings as a matter of fact, I think it would be unwise for me to start hypothesising about what should happen. But clearly, if the law has been broken in any way, shape or form, there should be very severe sanction indeed.
Criminal sanctions? I mean, what sanctions would you like
If
to see?
there is, obviously, if something criminal has taken place, that should do it. But I think the point is we need to actually look forward and figuring out how do we deal, number one, with the problem of putting healthy businesses under, and how can the restructuring group itself, just a second, do a better job so there's a win-win, a win for the bank and a win for the company itself, which means more of a Chapter 11 US-style restructuring, which we don't have in this country.
One of the problems is the process is very opaque. The transparency is negligible. People cannot understand what is happening, partly because it's not explained to them in the process.
Though, mightn't they?
Yeah,
I mean, we've heard the stories, and people might just feel it's very well looking to the future.
If people are breaking the law and doing criminal things and engaging in fraudulent, misstatements, etc., then of course people expect to see them banged up for that type of thing. If that is what's happened here.
Deborah, finally.
Well, I think it's 80% owned by the taxpayer. There is a not in my name question here. I think people are going to be very concerned about this because these are small businesses. These are friends, families, relatives, local communities that are being impacted by something that we are supposed to own and control. It just feels wrong.
Thank you both very much.
Thank you, Jo.